Hi, it's Ms. Hurst from Hamilton County Schools. We're going to continue our work with People on the Planet today. And we're actually going to be listening to an NPR interview about Follinsby Pond, which we read about yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Today we're going to be analyzing how an author's tone is developed throughout the course of a text. So as a reminder, what is tone and how does a reader determine the tone of the text? Go ahead and do that warm up, press pause and press play when you're ready to continue. So as you guys know, the tone is an author's attitude towards the subject of the text. And we figure out the tone by thinking about the specific word choices, or in this case, since it is an interview, the specific kind of like production choices that an author might make. So what we're going to do is you're going to do a first listen to this text, and don't forget to write down any words you don't know and highlight any parts that stand out to you. You can read it or we can listen to it. I'm going to go ahead and play it. It's called Retracing Ralph Waldo Emerson's Steps in a Now Unchanged Eden.
Under the cinders burn.
I started over.
It's high summer, and for many of us, that means it's time to go camping. Today, we're going to celebrate one particular camping trip, a famous one, way back in 1858. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great philosopher, essayist, and poet, set out into New York's Adirondack Mountains, and he took with him some of the most famous artists, scientists, and thinkers of his day. North Country Public Radio's Brian Mann retraced Emerson's journey.
I set out early in the morning in my canoe with environmental activist and writer Bill McKibben and our guide Mike Carr with the Nature Conservancy. Our idea is to paddle as closely as possible the route Emerson and a bunch of his friends took 157 years ago.
They came down through Stony Creek Ponds, just upstream, and floated down the Racket.
Emerson was in his 50s when he made the trip, already a famous poet and essayist. He came from Boston when the Adirondack Mountains were still really remote, a howling wilderness north of Albany. Getting here took days of travel by train and wagon and boat. On this day, it feels like nothing much has changed. We drift the current down the big river, under white pines as tall and straight as ship masts. We see beaver and an otter creasing the water. McKibben points out an eagle sweeping ahead of us.
Well, we're deep in paradise here, man.
Emerson's journey here was famous even while it was going on. The newspapers found out what he was up to, and people started calling it the Philosopher's Camp. The party included one of the great scientists of the day, a guy named Louis Agassiz, also a lawyer named Ebenezer Hoare, who would later serve as Attorney General of the United States. They passed through this vast meadow that links the Racket River to Follinsby Pond, where they planned to make camp. It's so quiet we can hear the wind as it lays the grass side to side.
That play of water and pickerel, lily, and grass and big pines on the edge, it's magnificent.
The next hour we crossed the open reach of the lake. One of the men on Emerson's trip was a painter, William James Stillman. He painted the scene of the Philosopher's Camp, with Emerson standing at the middle and Agassiz off to one side dissecting a trout. Using Stillman's painting as a guide, we're able to home in on the low rise where they camped, wading ashore through bog laurel and lilies.
This it?
Yeah, they dammed us up.
Bushwhacking through the woods, McKibben and Carr find the spring where Emerson drank, and huge boulders that may be the ones in Stillman's painting.
It really feels like hallowed ground. You know, we're standing in a hardwood stand with giant sugar maple and black cherry, big white birch here.
You know, we're used to thinking of sort of spiritual pilgrimages, or we go to Fenway Park, or, you know, or we have these historical pilgrimages where we go off to a battlefield or something. But what we come here to remember is this particular spark of intellectual energy.
The reason we followed Emerson's journey this summer is that a new book has been published about the Philosopher's Camp and the men who gathered here. The writer, James Schlatt, meets us at the lake. He says Emerson wasn't really much of an outdoorsman. He preferred his nature in small doses, in gardens and farm fields. But the poet wound up loving this place.
And it was a very meditative moment, just Emerson there, standing among these giant trees, taking it all in the quiet, away from the rabble of the camp.
This may be the biggest legacy of the Philosopher's Camp. This was the moment when one of our deepest thinkers on nature and the spirit took his deepest dive into a truly wild place, one that still boasted wolves and bears and mountain lions. In his poem about the trip, called Adirondack, Emerson sounds melancholy about leaving.
The holidays were fruitful, but must end. Under the cinders burn the fires of home. So in the gladness of the new event, we struck our camp and left the happy hills.
The Nature Conservancy bought Fallensby Pond 7 years ago. It isn't yet open to the public, and it's unclear when that might happen. What is certain is that this place where Emerson paddled out to look at the stars will stay wild and undeveloped forever. For NPR News, I'm Brian Mann in New York's Adirondack Mountains.
And now, more from NPR.
All right, so now we need to identify the tone. So how did the author develop this tone? So we have to figure out what the tone is before we can start thinking about how the author developed it. So I want you to take some time and just try to identify what the tone was. Press pause and press play when you're ready to continue. All right, so I think that the author felt like this topic was relatable, and also he's feeling curious about it. I'm going to give you some examples of why I think that this is the tone. So just the first line. Hi, summer. For a lot of us, that means it's time to go camping. I think the author relates their own hobbies to that of the reader, implying that we are all similar and relatable. That this topic is relatable. Similarly, she says, I'm not sure. Now I want to go back and see. Melissa Block. So she says, this day, it feels like nothing much has changed. So something I noticed is that this was like an professional article. However, the vocabulary is not trying too hard to be professional or fancy. Rather, it's pretty casual. This makes it more relatable to the average viewer and shows that the author thinks the topic is relatable, right? Or else you wouldn't have done that. And then I thought the interesting thing was the sounds in the background. So this shows that the people are going on an adventure, experiencing the actual camping trip. Shows that they aren't overly professional. They're also truly curious to experience this adventure, right? They're not just like talking about it. This makes the reader immediately feel like part of the trip. Okay, I want you to take some time to find more evidence of this relatable and curious tone. Press pause while you do that and press play when you're ready to continue. For our exit ticket today, I want you to do a quick write. How did the author develop the casual and relatable tone of this text? Be sure to include at least one example we did not discuss in this class, okay? So this is how you're gonna prove to me you understand it, is by giving me at least one example. So remember that good readers really consider how the author develops the tone of the text, because that's gonna help us better understand the text. Once you've done this exit ticket, you're good to go. Have a wonderful rest of your day.